It was spring 2005 when this occurred. Me and a few friends were hiking in Washington State, Wallace Falls to be exact. It was a great experience for us. Being from Kansas, where we only have flat land and a few small hills, we loved the view from the mountaintops, and I wanted to move there until we experienced this. The day we arrived, we set up camp quickly and went out to see the sights and get a general idea of our surroundings. We spent a few hours wandering the wilderness, then we gathered some wood for camp. We came across some strange wooden structures made from branches and twigs. Some were made like a dome and others looked like a teepee without the skin exterior. We didn't think much of it and figured it was likely makeshift tents. It looked abandoned, so we gathered the wood and took it back to camp. We made a few last preparations and got the fire going before settling in for the night. We gathered around the fire and had a few beers, telling scary stories and bonding before we head off to college. We retired to the tents around midnight and was asleep for maybe 2 hours when we were awoken by some strange sounds. We all met outside our tents. The sounds were distant, but we could not figure out what kind of animal it was. We came to the conclusion that it was either a bear or a wolf. Boy, were we wrong. The next morning we went out on a hike and decided that we would investigate the area the noises were coming from the night before. We went maybe half a mile and came to an area where the trees were mauled. All the branches from 10 to 12 feet up were twisted and broken. The air had a musty stench. We got an uneasy feeling and decided to head back to camp. That evening we were having dinner. It was just after dark and we heard something moving in the brush. Thinking it may have been a bear, we ran to the Jeep and got our sidearms. We continued to hear it throughout the night, but we never saw it. The following morning, we were walking a trail just above our campsite when we smelled that same musky smell as before. That day we met up with other campers. They were locals. We told them about what had been going on, and they said it was likely a bear, as there is a large population in this area. That evening when we returned to camp, we saw that the firewood we gathered had been used to make the teepee formations again. We laughed it off, thinking it was the other campers playing a prank on us. That night, after we had went to sleep, we heard something in the brush again, but this time, it was closer. We were too far from the Jeep to get the firearms, so we just listened. It sounded like it was in our camp. We could hear the leaves and the twigs cracking, but after 20 minutes or so, it was gone. That next morning, we walked around the site. Trees and branches had been snapped, but none of our supplies were missing. We told ourselves it was just a bear, but I wasn't so sure, and I don't think the others were either. We didn't go for a hike that day. We decided to go into town to get a few more supplies. The shopkeeper asked us if we were campers. We told him about what we had been experiencing. He was telling us about an urban legend in the area and reporting sightings of a Bigfoot. The trip back to camp, we were all talking about what the guy had told us. None of us believed what he had said. We thought it was just a myth to increase tourism in a small town. That night, we decided to keep the pistol with us in case whatever it was returned. We laid awake, waiting to hear it. Hours went by, but nothing. That morning, we were all relieved, thinking it was gone, so we decided to go for a hike. We got lost on the trail and it was getting dark. We were all beginning to freak out a bit and we were arguing with one another. But we quickly turned our focus to a noise just off the trail. As we were walking, something was stalking us. Now we were really freaking out and began running, not caring if we were headed toward the campsite or not. After running for about 10 minutes, we stopped to catch our breath and listen for our stalker, but all we hear is our heavy breathing and silence. We look at our map, trying to determine where our camp was. We finally find the way back to our site, and we make it back around 9:30. All of our belongings were scattered around the campground. But what was really strange is our sleeping bags were placed in the trees about 14 feet or so off the ground. We quickly clean up the campsite and use a ladder to get our sleeping bags out of the trees. We decided to keep our sidearms one more night. We had to go to the Jeep to get them, and we decided it best to go together. And what we found was just off. There were strange, human-like prints on the windows, but they were larger than any of our hands. Much larger. We get the guns and ammo and hightail it back to the camp. We decided to build a small fire that night, hoping that it would keep the prankster out of our camp. But looking back on it now, that was likely a mistake. We settled in for the night and wasn't asleep for an hour when we heard something moving just above our camp. We lay there quietly, just listening. About that time we heard something running toward our camp, and it had to be huge. The thud of its paws or feet or whatever hitting the ground drowned out all other noise. It was right on top of us now. We could hear it breathe. And there was that musky smell again, only this time it was much stronger. We all tried to keep ourselves from coughing, but it was so foul. It was right outside our tent. We could feel it as it ran its hands along the outside. I pulled my pistol, took off the safety, and pulled back the hammer. It must have heard me do so, because it let out a roar, spun our tent around, and ran off into the woods. I don't know why we didn't just leave then, because things were about to get a lot worse. Later that night, we heard a loud thump. I now know that this is what's known as knocking, but at the time, I had no idea what was going on. After about 15 minutes, the sound stopped. We all got out of our tents. The fire had been put out, so it was pitch black. In the distance, we could hear something moving, but we couldn't see anything. We quickly tried to get the fire going again, but before we could, we heard something crash to the ground. We moved back away from the mountain. Whatever this was, it's certainly no bear, because bears do not throw rocks. The rocks stop and we listen to see if we can hear anything. We hear it moving through the brush, and it sounded as if it was coming right at us. We all aim our pistols in the direction of the thing and fire. It lets out a loud roar. It was deafening, but it was still coming. We fire again, but this time it didn't even stop. If anything, it was now coming faster. We turn and run toward the Jeep. We jump in, and just as we started to roll away, the Jeep shifted. We look out the side window, and this thing, its face, there's no other way to describe it other than it being very human-like. I don't know how big this thing was, but it had to be massive, because it was pushing the Jeep sideways. I put the Jeep in four-wheel drive and quickly pull away. The others yell for me to go faster because this thing was running after us. I see something across the road just ahead of us. I slam on my brakes. A large tree had been placed across the road. I wasn't about to turn around or get out, so I drive off the side of the road to get past the tree. Luckily, we had just enough room to clear it. I took the Jeep out of 4-wheel drive and sped off. I don't know if this was a Bigfoot, but it certainly wasn't anything that we had encountered in Kansas. What's up, guys? Hope you enjoyed the video. And hey, if you did enjoy that video, please like and share it, guys. That would help me out a great deal and I would really appreciate it. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, what are you waiting for? Click on the channel icon in the top left corner to subscribe now. And if you have a horror story that you would like to share on the channel, please email me. I will leave a link to my email in the description below. Thank you again for watching and have a great night, evening, day, wherever you are. Have a good one.